Do we have, oh, we're on. We're on. Is your mic on? You want to test it? Yeah?
Testing, yes.
Yeah, okay, we're good. Hello, apologies for the delay. We were getting lighting figured out and camera angles figured out. Welcome to the CVA Gallery. We are closing our fall 2024 event this evening. We have the artist Anna Vizcarra-Rankin with us, whose work is all around us for those of you who are with us in the gallery. And you can visit the CVA Gallery website at Brookdale's website to see some of the art online. More to come on that. You'll be able to see more of it in the future. So we are ending our exhibit for the fall with a talk with the artist. We invited, over the course of the past few weeks, we invited students and clubs from the Brookdale community. We invited them to ask questions about the artwork, about the artist, about the exhibit. The exhibit is called Nepantla, Maps for Uncharted Futures. And we got questions across the board. Yeah, so what we'll do, yeah, we're excited to talk about it. So what we'll do is we'll spend most of our time addressing the different categories of questions that we got from students and student clubs. But I think we should first start off by giving you an opportunity to maybe introduce yourself to the students, to the community. You've got a lot going on lately. Which is an understatement, right? So in addition to being an artist and doing the artwork here, you've been at UNC this semester. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Hello. Hello. How do I sound? Good? Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for having me and for this conversation. I'm Anna Vizcarra-Rankin, AV for short. And yes, I made all the artwork here over the last, I think the oldest work here is a little over a decade old, 2012.
Yeah.
I think
that one and that
2011
one, yeah.
maybe. All the way up to, you know, the work right behind us, Balance of Power, was still a little wet when it arrived. So Elisa did a really good job of choosing all of this out of a lot more. So I'm thrilled with how it all came together. I think you did an incredible job of choosing work that plays well together, but is also really varied. And it goes really well with this idea that kind of brought this exhibition into being, which was the in-betweenness, the Nepantla, right?
Right.
And yes, I have always been an artist since I can remember. And I started teaching a little bit here and there after grad school. And now I have been lured by the joys of the light in students' eyes. And it seems like every semester I take on just one more class. You know, oh, but how can I say no to color theory? It's my favorite. And I've found this other amazing group of students too that are multidisciplinary. It's an honors program that kind of brings different disciplines together in this behemoth of a school system that's University of North Carolina. And they graciously invited me to bring art into that melee, and I think that's new for them, and I have just felt so welcome. Much like I did here, this program here is unique and incredible, the integration of the architecture and the design and the interior design and the fine art. There's a lot happening for this to be a relatively small community.
Yeah, and our students have loved getting to meet you, and from our interior design students to our architecture students to our fine art students, and the professors have all loved having the opportunity to meet you and see your work. And one of the categories of questions that kept coming up again and again was about you as an artist, right? So we have folks from fine arts, but folks from design disciplines as well, and they were all curious about, you know, what do you do when you have a roadblock? What do you do when you're not inspired? What is, you know, how are you motivated? What is your practice? And we were just kind of touching on this a little bit before you and I thought that your answer was really important for us to maybe unpack a little bit more here and have students be able to engage a little bit, if you don't mind, maybe addressing that a little bit.
So where should we start?
I think we should start with, what do you do when you don't know what to do, when you have a block, when you're not sure? Because I feel like it's the end of the semester and a lot of our students are maybe sweating bullets in that way a little bit, like how do I finish? What do I do? So what do you, as a professional artist who's been in practice for decades, what do you do when you don't know what to do?
I love it. You're starting with the trick question. You're starting with the trick question. So I just work. I don't really get blocks anymore. If you find yourselves in graduate school, one of the things that sort of gets drilled into your brain is that you just do the work. There's always work. One of the readings that I teach is it's from this short book called Art and Fear, and it's a chapter from it called Finding Your Work. And it talks about not everybody can be Mozart, not everybody can be Einstein, but we can all create a body of work throughout our lives that can find itself being brilliant because we're doing the work. So you just show up, and once you've found your work and you've found your place where work happens, so not just the sort of path that you enjoy treading, even if it becomes very familiar and rote, if you do it enough times, you'll find that extra side quest that maybe takes you in the direction that you wanted to go in all along, but you're not going to find it if you're not just doing the work. So at this point, after decades of working, I just don't ever have an opportunity of not having anything to do. Because even if I wake up one afternoon and maybe I don't have a new idea, well, I have 78 other ideas that maybe got abandoned or put on hold or in the back burner, or I had to go do something else before I could finish, and I can revisit that, and then I'm like, there's this other idea, and it just feeds on itself. You just kind of, because one of the things we kept talking about too is this idea of practice, right?
Right.
And so you have all these different practices, meditation practice and yoga practice, and it's like building a mountain out of sheets of paper, and it becomes a very solid and heavy mountain, and it doesn't feel like you're doing anything, but it just keeps building and building and building, and eventually you have reams of layers to pull from, and I don't know I can't imagine what it would feel like anymore to be blocked.
Right, to not be making or doing or producing. It's
My
a way of being.
Biggest frustration is that I'm going to die 80 years from now, and I'm going to have more stuff unfinished than I do now.
Right, like Michelangelo, right? There's so much. There's not enough time.
Yeah.
I love that. And I think that that's helpful, that idea, and I love that you mentioned, like, grad school, it takes time to develop that practice, right? That discipline, that way of being in the world that produces, something to do, even when you're not sure what the next thing is to do.
I think that was the moment when it was identified for me, that it was like, well, yeah, you just do it. You're here to do it. It is who you are.
Yeah.
And so you become the art.
Right,
It is, I am my practice.
And I think some of it also maybe comes from that experience of, I made things and they were terrible. I made things and people hated them. I made things and some people liked them. I made things and everybody liked them. And it's just, and you're still you. So you're like, oh, okay. Well, I can still, I know we talked a little bit, and I'm pointing to the back right, one of your earlier works that I'm wondering if we can talk about a little bit, because that's one of the pieces you made in graduate school. I think that's the only piece you made in graduate school, Tropic of Cancer.
And the self-portrait.
And the self-portrait. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. So the story of the Tropic of Cancer, we were not planning on going there, by the way. Completely, right, which has nothing to do with the Tropic of Cancer. But you made it in graduate school, and you shared that it wasn't received all that well. Would you mind sharing that story just a little bit?
Sure. I've had some really harsh critiques. I mean, the self-portrait, I was told, just don't don't do that anymore. And I didn't. You know, and there was one critic, visiting critic that came through, and he is such a wonderful artist, Willie Cole. If you haven't heard of him, check him out. He came in and he said, don't listen to them, listen to your heart. You can keep making as many of these as you want, you just don't have to share them. And that was a really, really great piece of advice. And I did continue to create self-portraits, but I stopped working in that style because I think that there had been like an eagerness to please that I realized, who am I making these for anyway? If I'm making them for myself, I can make them however I want. And then the small charcoal piece, which found a home, I can't believe it. It's going to be lumped somewhere. Yeah, that's one of the first maps that I made with the South at the top, which is a direct homage to Joaquin Torres Garcia, because I'm from Uruguay, and so this map of South America with the South at the top is ubiquitous. So I guess I just had really internalized it. And I really, when you and I were chatting about it, I couldn't remember. I was like, yeah, it's titled Tropic of Cancer.
That's right.
And it's, you know, it's made on this beautiful, like, laid paper that has ley lines, and it's like a mulberry. And I made it using, you know, vine charcoal. So it's a very humble materials, but it has this one kind of evanescent latitude line that's made of gold leaf. And I was like, so it's the Tropic of Cancer. And then I looked at it, I looked at the image because we were zooming and looking at it, and I was like, wait a minute, that doesn't look like it's in the right place for the Tropic of Cancer. Tropic of Cancer's further north, south, I don't know. That actually looks like the Mason-Dixon line. But it's going across the whole world. And I had, you know, recently started to kind of recognize this discomfort in this country because I had moved to, you know, I grew up in Oklahoma where they sent all the Native American populations. And then I had lived in North Carolina, which is, you know, a state that is still in turmoil in terms of like an identity crisis of whether it's a southern state or it's definitely not a northern state, that's for sure. And then I was in Philadelphia, and I don't recall making the decision to like put that there as the Mason-Dixon line, but I was also reading Thomas Pynchon, Mason and Dixon, around that time. So it may have been like a Thomas Pynchon late night grad school moment.
Those were the best moments.
Yeah, Tropic of Cancer, Mason, it's all the same, right? And that other, the Tropic of Cancer, the book, the
Henry Miller.
Henry Miller,
yeah.
and I hated that
Henry
book.
Miller.
I did not like it. Apologies if anybody's a big fan. So I was in that like Thomas Pynchon, Henry Miller understanding of United States history and legacy, and that happened, and I showed it at a end of semester critique, and everybody was just, you know, it was mostly ignored, and then when it was addressed, they were like, yeah, it's very small and poor, you know. And I held on to it, like I've really treasured it, and I put that little, there's a little guard against the evil eye on it made of wood, and that's a keepsake that I got from a travel somewhere. Somebody handed me one of those, like they give them to you, you know, monks and stuff. And so I placed that there, and it all became a little bit of like a poem in a way of like the moment where I presented it, and what was it, and I don't know, and I had never really like thought about it much beyond like having had it be something that I treasured. And that did keep drawing. The curators that did the Brandywine show noticed it and were like, we have to show this one.
Oh, wow.
And you noticed it.
Yes.
You're like, we have to
I
show
was
this
so
one.
excited.
And yet, you know, faculty critics were like,
why would you
we
do
like
that?
the big ones. Keep doing the big ones. You know?
Right, right, yeah. And I love within that story, there's just that idea kind of related to what you were saying before, the discipline of making. And it's, you know, it's not necessarily about the reception you get sometimes. It's not necessarily even if your faculty or your peers or even the public really, you know, are super excited about what you're doing. Sometimes you're doing it for you. And you never know where that leads, you know. And I look at that piece, and we've talked about that a lot as it's hung here over the course of the semester. And you know, you made that in 2012, right? And in some ways, for me, looking at your work here, I feel like then, you know, the rejection of it was in some ways the foundation of so much of the work that's around us, and it's beautiful work. It's such important work. So it's so exciting that you know, that idea of not finding a warm reception to it didn't, you know, that's not the end of something.
Right.
And it's not necessarily even the meaning of something.
And my relationship with coal and with carbon sustained to the point where I made this whole other body of work that is just these giant black dots, right? And I still use like graphite and charcoal to begin. Like I often begin with carbon on a raw fiber.
Right, elemental material. Let's talk about those, because there's quite a few in the show, even more in your oeuvre, like just.
Yeah, we brought more and we could not
I know,
find
we need to
enough
double the
spots to
size
put
of
them.
the gallery so we can do another show and hang more of them. But so there's a lot to the process and the techniques that you use there. A lot of folks, as they came through and they looked at these pieces, you know, talked to me about Jackson Pollock. Right? I know, and that's what I like. So when I was in grad school, I made the argument that the one thing that we need in the art world is less people talking about Jackson Pollock and fewer books about Jackson Pollock. So I was like, okay, take your point. I see what you're saying, right? There's that embodiment. There's that sense. You know, some of the work, we could see your footprints in some of the pieces. We can see your cat's footprints in some of the pieces. So can you unpack for us? And maybe I'll gesture to this because it's behind us, and folks who are with us online can also see it. How do these come to be? How do you make these? What's your relationship to, you know, just gravity and space and material when you're making these large-scale pieces?
So Lee Krasner. No. Thank you for getting it. So it's about embodiment, right?
Yeah.
Am I allowed to stand up?
I have no problem with you standing.
So all these pieces are the size of my body. And they're not bigger than my body, right? And what ends up happening is I paint them like this, right? So they're this size. They're not bigger than that. They're not smaller than that because they're human-sized. Yeah. And if you walk up to them, you get close enough, you're enveloped. But they're not so large that they're this like mural that you see from like far away. They still reward close viewing, right? So they all begin with that, with whether they all begin on the ground, because you can't get this like nice flat black surface hanging, except for Kung Fu Funeral has a lot of drips, but that's a heavy piece in so many ways. That one's about the death of a dear friend and Kung Fu master. But most of them begin on the ground with this black dot, right? And then I hand map the stars. I do what's called an ephemerid, which is a specific place and time of where the stars are as viewed from the ground, right? And so I map that out by hand, and then usually like on a sketchbook, and then I transfer it. And a lot of the times that happens on the wall. But they become these objects of consciousness too, which is another definition I really like for art by Elliot Deutsch. So they start to get, you know, like the video is one of these star maps that I was doing during an artist residency that ended up, we didn't get to hang cricket. So
I know.
I had like wrapped myself in it and dove into the ocean, because one of the things that happens is I'm working on raw cotton. And if you brine it, I don't know if I have any fibers people here, if you brine a raw fabric, it softens it and it tightens it. So it's not like felting where you heat it up and it gets tight.
Yeah.
This like softens it but makes it hold together better.
Like the weave.
So it takes, it takes pigment a different way. So anytime I can throw one of these with like that first layer of black into an ocean, I try to take that opportunity.
Wow.
There's a few pictures of me doing that. And because I use organic, like carbon-based ink, I try not to use anything that's gonna like have microplastics.
Right.
It feels really good, and it has this kind of, you were talking about rituals earlier, that there were questions.
Yes, right.
It has
What are
this
your
kind
rituals?
of ritual
Yeah,
feeling
absolutely.
to it
Yeah.
of getting these pieces that are the size of my body, and I get these 500-yard rolls,
Wow.
and I take a an 8-foot by 8-foot piece, and I just dunk it.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
then and then it collects a little bit of sand from that one particular space, and it gathers that energy, that magic.
I love that. Yeah, we have, so in the what we've called the Nook, we have that video, right? And if you haven't had a chance to see it yet, you'll see Anna wraps herself in one of these pieces and walks into the ocean. And it has baffled so many folks. So many folks have been like, what, why, what? So we have this on video archived. You'll always have the answer to what and why. And that's just an unexpected thing for an artist to do. Let me take my work and walk into the ocean with it. And something else that folks have commented on is, the folds.
The folds,
The
Talk about a bad reception. That's still bugging people.
Yeah, so it's an so we talked about, these are maps, right? And I know in our world today, everyone's maps are on our phone, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. But those of us who are, of a certain age, remember that wasn't always what maps were. And so there's this idea of your work. I don't want to say it's not precious, because it is, but it's
not fragile.
It's
Precious
not fragile.
things don't have to be fragile.
I love that.
Our planet is precious. Think about everything we've done to it. It is not fragile.
But it's precious.
But it is precious, yeah.
Yeah. And I love that. I think that's a beautiful way to think about it. And that's what your work is, right? And the folds, the creases, when we took out some of the pieces, you're like, nope, this has to go back, and we've got to, this needs a little bit of love before we exhibit this again. But you're very comfortable with that. I know the piece that you and I met about is one of your large flesh planets.
Yeah.
And we've talked about that. It's around the corner, so I'm sorry, folks online. I know you can't see it where you're sitting right now. You saw it when you came in. And when we hung it, this realization of how fragile it is.
Yeah, that one is fragile. But it's less precious because it's made out of garbage, right?
Right, it's made out of just cut up Victoria's Secret magazines, I think, right?
That one has a lot of like Vogue, I think, in it. But yeah.
So that history, and someone said we should, when we deinstall it, can you take a picture of the back, right? Because it's that idea of like the material that you're using and how all of it is a part of the piece,
and
right?
The time, the document, not just the time that it takes to make, but it's a snapshot of that moment in time of when these advertisements were made, because so many of these images are very commercial.
Right.
They're showing skin, and then in the surrounding you have all of these images of luxury. Yeah. Usually it's luxurious nature, which is presented in very specific ways. It's always empty. The lawns are always perfectly manicured.
Right.
The same way
green.
that hands are perfectly manicured, lawns are perfectly. It's all perfectly perfect.
Right.
And then, as opposed to like a National Geographic, which every once in a while I dive in there. Yeah. The piece I'm working on now, I can't wait to talk to you about.
Should we talk about that?
Very briefly, but sure.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm doing like an all black and white yoga piece from Bikram Chowdhury yoga book that he published before he got canceled.
He got very canceled.
You know, he and Pollock, whatever. And so I feel like I'm finding like a place of solace for the bodies that were in that book.
Oh, that's interesting.
But yeah, so the material that these planets get made from, and then the star maps, you have the stars, right? But then the horizon becomes very important too. Like the piece behind us has like Tulum, and you know what Tulum was and what it is now, and talk about Nepantla, right? Like, how do you even approach Tulum, like as a vacationer, as a
tourist,
as a native? You know, the cenotes, like the dirty diapers in the cenotes, and so like these horizons become also, again, like a bearing witness of, you know, the forests, of the oceans, and of the development, right? And the commoditization of our horizon line, even.
And the edge condition is so interesting because so many folks come in, and even from a distance, they perceive it as an object, right? And then as they get closer, they have this realization that it's really more of like a portal with this edge, right, that has information on it, and different meaning.
And I can stretch canvas with the best of them. I love like really high quality, you know, hardwood stretchers that are like perfectly dovetailed. And you know, and I have collectors that demand that, and I'm happy to provide. But like, until that moment, which is like, is that the moment that that art is born, or is it when it dies? Right.
It's like done.
That it's mounted now.
It's on the wall. We finished it.
It is now performing its job as a piece of art. Like,
you can put it in a textbook.
Works to me, like they're still in progress. They're working. They're still working. They're like being folded and unfolded and shipped around.
They're visiting us and touched and looked at. I know when you arrived with this with everything that's around us, it was like on one cart. Like everything just came in. It was the most. I was like, how is that going to be? This.
And we had leftovers.
And we had so many leftovers. Like I said, we have to double the size of the gallery to be able to show everything that we had wanted to show. But we should maybe talk about, you're talking about Tulum and cenotes, and we're circling around this idea a little bit of what this exhibit is about, right? Nepantla. Nepantla is an Aztec word. It's a Nahuatl word. Nahuatl is the language that the Aztecs spoke. And it means a lot of different things, right? So for the Aztecs, for example, in the Florentine Codex, they talk about it as sometimes as almost like a midday condition, right? Nepantla, that time between the morning and the evening,
time.
Right? Yeah, siesta, yeah. But then later, in about like the 60s, 70s, Gloria Anzandula brings this word Nepantla back into contemporary usage, and she uses it to describe the in-between space of folks who inhabit different identities, right? Multiple identities. For Anzandula, she talks about being a Chicana living in Texas, right? So very much part of a Hispanic culture and machismo, while also being a queer woman simultaneously. And how there's this unique space created between the conditions of those two identities that she inhabits that feels really lonely, that feels really other. And she writes about that a lot. And then she writes about how from that space of loneliness and being othered, you develop skills, you develop awarenesses, you develop ways of how you can see the world, how you can be in the world, and those can actually become beautiful abilities. those can become abilities that can help us solve problems that we live in the world today and think of as maybe unsolvable. And we can look in those in-between spaces and look at folks who inhabit those in-between spaces, and there's so much richness there. And that, you know, you and I talked about that so much over the summer, and that kind of started to pull everything together for us a little bit. Now, I came to the idea of Nepantla because I studied it as a graduate student. I was born in Mexico City. There was a lot of different opportunities for me to come to that. But you came to the idea of Nepantla from science fiction.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It cropped up in a novel I was reading.
Yeah.
And I think, like etymologically, doesn't it mean like a land between two rivers? Because as a map person, I was like, you know, and what a wonderful place to like build a place is between two rivers, but it constricts you.
Right.
But it's also so fertile, right? Because you're protected and constricted. It's not an island,
right?
But it's, you know, surrounded by water. So I loved that, the between two rivers, and then all of these ideas of resilience, right? And then when you shared your heritage, I think that really just chucked us off the cliff.
Yeah, it all kind of came together a little bit. And so one of the questions students had, one was, what is this word? Where did it come from, right? But another one was, how do you see your own practice, your own work, perhaps, through this idea of Nepantla, if you do, even? Yeah,
no, I mean, I think once we floated that word as a title for the show, you know, I had been hesitant to use it because I didn't want to culturally appropriate it as someone who is not Chicana. Right. But since you were the curator, you had, you had the authority, right? So there was that. But then I'm always thinking about this idea of, you know, we're all immigrants, we're all settlers. Honestly, what places on this planet are left that are currently inhabited by people who are from there and unchanged? And they are precious few. Absolutely. And I don't really think there is any part of the planet left that's unchanged. Right? And so we all have these like identities and these legacies. And I've always wished I were from somewhere. Right?
That's such an interesting thing.
And I'm not from anywhere.
Right.
I mean, I can say I'm from Uruguay, but really, Uruguayos and Uruguashis, we're not, the entire native population was massacred. Everybody there is either European or African or Asian descent. Yeah. So really nobody from Uruguay is from anywhere. Like we're all from everywhere. And then, you know, and then I moved to the States and I was Latina, which is so bizarre.
Right. I struggle with that.
And I really, you know, my time in Oklahoma, I really connected with the Cherokee Nation folk and the Crow and Chickasaw and Choctaw and all those awesome folks that were, you know, in and out of the reservation. And I wished I could like be one of them, but I'm not Native American either. Like I think I have like some Guarani great grandmother or something, but I'm not gonna count that. I'm not a pretendian, you know? So I'm not an anything. Yeah. And I'm not like sufficiently, you know, trans or you know, a dark enough or weird enough color to really count, you know, like I'm just me. And I'm this like small, now blue-haired. I've been blue-haired for like a decade now. Maybe that's like I'm just trying to be something. Right?
At least I'm this. Like, I know I'm blue-haired.
And I think that's my Nepantla, is this kind of, well, I'm not really in anything, so I could be in it and anything I want, because I'm not, because I'm kind of like nothing.
Yeah, I'm not this, I'm not that, I'm just me. I'm just here, I'm just me.
And I had this really like deep discomfort, again, going back to, art history in grad school, and then when I started teaching, I noticed that if you are non-male and non-white, you are better received as an artist if you're making art about being not male and not white.
Right.
Whereas if you are male and white, you can make art about anything you want.
Right.
And I was like, well, I'm going to make art about anything I want, and I'm going to not address the fact that I am whatever.
Yeah.
But I am always going to point at the point of view, that there's always, everybody's looking at everything from somewhere. We're all our main characters,
Yes.
right? We're all
Yeah.
the main protagonist in our story.
Yeah.
And the more, there's like a nice line between experiencing enough discomfort to build resilience and being like a terrifically privileged person, or being just completely beat down where you're like, ugh, I'm just gonna tend bar and not make art and just grow bunions. I'm just relieved that didn't, like I was able to push past it, and like I got to make art, and now I get to like share this, fun madness with a method that is my life.
Which is a great. So I have a question to that. So you do. So sometimes you use AV, right? Your initials. So A period V period Rankin. And I do that sometimes. Sometimes I just use E period Alorza. And it is because I'm not interested in my gender being involved with what I'm doing. Is that where that comes from for you?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. The first solo show that I had, everybody thought I was a guy.
That's right, you said that.
Yeah, these two.
It was in a bar,
types.
right?
Yeah,
You were
it was
in a
bar. It was a oil, like it was in Oklahoma, and it was a martini bar, and most of the patrons were oil guys.
Yeah.
So, not a whole lot of education, but like quite a bit of money to spend, and they were, and a lot of my work had, nudity in it, and it was explicit nudity, and it was at a bar, and they were like, this guy paints some really hot chicks,
You're like, yeah, who is this
and a lot of the work ended up selling, and I think, even one of them ended up buying it after finding out that it was by me, because he was like, that's just weird. But I've noticed the reception that I get when I neutralize my gender, there is a bias.
Yeah.
There is a bias, not necessarily a negative bias.
100%. 100%.
Because there's a deep thirst for, more women artists.
Sure.
And I just, really? Do I have to?
Right. Do I have to be?
To the point where, like, some of this work got shown at an embassy, and we had a translator translating the curatorial statement, who was written by an English-speaking curator, into Spanish. And I was like, I can do it. And they were like, no, we have an official translator, because, we're at an embassy, and we need to make sure that it's translated in such a way. And this translator was very invested in calling me la artista. And I was like, I hate the way that sounds. It's uncomfortable. And so I was like, I want to be el artista, which is, it's like el is typically masculine. And so I ended up coming up with, XE, chi, as my non-binary personal pronoun, just so I could circumvent this discomfort. And, and I've always been queer and odd, and I love the non-binary trans movement, that it is here now, but I'm before that time, we just didn't have that when I was dealing with my identity.
Sure.
And then the third person plural is linguistically awkward for me.
Okay.
I'm happy to use it for other people, and this idea of like two spirits. I'm starting to wrap my brain around it as like the spirit of the artist being that second spirit that you carry, and then the story of the Nook, of the artist as like a prophet and the artist as a sacrifice.
Yeah.
But I think I've gotten myself derailed. Yeah.
Well,
it's
'cause
back
it's a
to
lot.
Nepantla.
It's back
You
to
know,
Nepantla.
it's
It
this,
circles
this
back to
comfort of,
Nepantla.
but I don't even want to
Yeah.
have to, but
Right.
you do have to, because especially as you get older, people are watching you.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and seeing what
Right.
they can or cannot become
Right.
when you're making a bunch of big work and taking over a beautiful space like this. It's like, yeah, you can do this.
What's
You don't-
possible?
You
Yeah.
don't have to talk about being a woman artist if you don't
Right.
want to.
Right. You can. It's there. It's available.
yeah.
Or you can choose not to. And that the choice, I think, is such a great opportunity to be able to take. You mentioned the Nook. We talked around it a little bit. We should talk about that a little bit more, I think, because I know we're getting close on time, and I don't know if there's any questions in the audience. So everything in this exhibit has been photographed. Everything in this exhibit actually is for sale, except the Nook. So the Nook is the 12-foot by 7-foot area in the gallery where nothing has been photographed by us. The images are not shared by the gallery, by the school outside of the gallery. And none of it's for sale. And the self-portrait that's there has never been shown before.
Yeah, it's never been
and we've
public,
heard the story. we've heard its story a little bit. And now, and I invite all of you, and it will be on the website, there's a QR code on the side wall that includes the full statement by Anna about, we'll say, what's happening with the different pieces, the different elements of the Nook. But what I want to point out here is that it's there's a self-portrait on the Nook. It's the only figural piece in the entire exhibit. And you know, the majority of the pieces are maps, right? And something I learned years ago, but I still remember how startled I was by this idea, was that maps aren't facts. I remember reading that and I had to go back and read it, and I was like, are you sure? Because I feel like if I want to know where the intersection of this and this is, and I look at a map, I can look at the map and it's there, and then I can go in the world and it's there. That kind of feels like a fact to me. And so I learned a little bit more about this idea that maps are viewpoints. They're perspectives, right? When you follow Torres Garcia and you put the South on the top of a global map, right? The South on the top, and you help us realize that when we think of the world, it's really a sphere. When we think of this sphere that we live on, it's really a planet in space, and space is a void. So there's no north. There's no south. There's no. It's a sphere in a void. There can't possibly be a north or a south or an up or a down, and so it kind of unsettles us. It deconstructs that expectation of facts of space, of facts of the world. We're in the north, right? The global south. You put your self-portrait and you into the gallery, into the exhibit. You positioned it so everyone who walks into the gallery passes by your gaze.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah?
It's so apotropaic, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
A pretty gargoyle.
And it's a reminder that all of the maps here are not objective. They're your subjective take on things.
They're not neutral.
And they're not neutral.
They all have a point of view.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, including, I know it's difficult to see, it's on the ground, balance of power, which is a newer approach to mapping for you. You have the poles at the center on the top, right?
Yeah, balance of power is my new, I'm very enamored with that piece. Yeah, because I think it's so important. Come, you want to come up? Yeah?
Yeah, join us.
Yeah. So this is Dita, this is my daughter. So balance of power, whoa. Oh dear, okay, I see what happened here. So balance of power is, it's a hemispheric map, and I think it's the way, I think it would be such a great way to teach maps to children, because it's so accurate. It's so much more accurate than most of the projections that we're using. And you can fold it, and it's a flat globe.
Yeah.
And the land masses are the right size. And the oceans are the right size. So the proportions are correct. And then it was cooked up by, it sounds like the lead-in into a joke. It was like a statistician, a cartographer, and a physicist walk into a bar.
They make this map.
Two of them are from Princeton, and the other one is from Drexel. And it was brought to my attention by a collector who used to live in Princeton as something that I would be interested in, and she was absolutely right. And now, and what I did, my contribution is the heat component of, it's cold at the poles and it heats up towards red at the equator. And then this idea of we should leave half of the earth to wildlife, but I think we should leave 3/4 of it. So I have, the human feet, but then the other feet and hoofs
other
and
living
talons
species,
and tail. But as I was working on it, and I get lots of feedback, right now, I thought, how great would it be if we were able to just kind of switch the way we think about maps from this like north, south, the Mercator nonsense to something like this balance of power where, the north and the south, the poles, the importance of the poles, they are melting. There's so much packed into just this projection.
Yeah.
And it's once I started painting enough maps with the north at the top, with the north at the bottom, with the south at the, now maps with the north at the top look a little weird to me.
Yeah.
Because I'm so used to it.
Right.
How cool would it be if we just thought of the world as these two, halves of an orange that are equal, and yet, each contain so much important biodiversity.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I'm just really into it, and I look at the elementary school libraries, and this is the first year many libraries are having to cut the amount of holdings that they have. I was talking to a few librarians throughout the country, and I'm like, well, if you're gonna have to pare down, at least maybe we can switch to this projection. It's a little bit
You're
better,
weeding out maps. Can we just have this map?
Yeah, can we just introduce, and they're like because there's this deep interest in only collecting new books. You can't really buy books that are more than 10 years old.
Oh,
and
that's
new,
interesting.
Just new content. And I'm like, well, this is new. It's a new, let's switch to this one. Just throw all the other ones out and keep this one.
Yeah, right.
It's great digitally. It's great, on
and
paper.
It changes so much of how you
it
think
folds
about.
into two.
Right.
How can you not love it?
Right. Yeah, and you'll have to take a peek at it when you come over and see.
And I love that you let me show it horizontal, and that we found a way to make that happen.
I think, and that was with so much, right? We had Bob in here from architecture. We were figuring things out. We had the theater was bringing us boards. This was like a team effort to get this figured out, but I think it was well worth it. I think maybe to wrap up, because I know Dita, it's been a long day, right? I know, it's been a long day for me too, girl. I hear that. Maybe just in terms of wrapping up, we're archiving this exhibit, right? Brookdale has so many amazing resources, one of which is the TLC and the folks in the TLC, and they've been here with us along with our gallery interns. And we've done a 360 virtual reality archive of the exhibit. I'm so excited about this. And we're in post-production for that right now. And I was, we were on the phone last night complaining about your plane being canceled and how you guys have just been back and forth and all over trying to get here. And we're so glad that you were able to get here. And I was complaining to you about we have this 360 VR and the pieces are so large that when you rotate your virtual reality angle, they get incredibly warped. Like they go, so instead of being like these parallel edges, it just kind of goes like this. And I was so I'm like, but we're gonna meet on Friday and we're gonna try to figure out, we're gonna tackle this, and you had a completely different response than I did.
I was so into it.
You were so excited.
I was like, it balloons out. I love it when it does that.
What, does it do it a lot? That was like so much.
Yeah, I worked in real estate at one point in time, because we all do things
to whatever.
Keep the art habit fed.
Yeah.
And so I keep track of a lot of the trends, and this 3D VR thing is very popular in high-end real estate listings.
Sure.
And I noticed the ballooning that occurs.
Yes.
And when it occurs, like It has to do with, the size of a space and the size of an object in the space. And it's so different from the way we perceive reality in real life that I think it's so wonderful, because it doesn't try to convince you that you are in reality. It's like, no, this is how the camera sees it.
This is not the gallery. This is a 360 VR interpretation of the gallery.
Map is not the territory.
Right.
The VR is not the reality. I'm beyond thrilled that we're going to have this as a keepsake. And at the same time, if you weren't here, you missed it. You know?
Right, because it didn't balloon out in person.
And that's good.
Yeah.
That's good, because, time and space in our bodies, we're just in them like that.
Yeah.
Right, Dita?
Like that.
Like that.
That.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that idea of letting the thing be what it is, right? It's very Rene Magritte, right? This is not a pipe, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is not the painting. This is the VR distortion of the painting. And I think we have so now of course we have to let this happen. We have to let the 360 VR balloon out. And then when we do that, and this is something, hopefully everyone will be able to jump onto the website. In January, we'll be posting the 360 VR, along with some interdisciplinary lesson plans about the idea of Nepantla, about the idea of mapping, about the exhibit in general. There's a lot of disciplinarity in your world, and a lot of folks on your end that are excited about this project. So can you share with our community a little bit about, we know what we're doing, but how does that land in your world? And what are those connections we're going to start to have between Brookdale and UNC and your practice
and
as a result?
Yeah. So I just brought up that that this was something that that you guys were doing, and one of our history professors got really excited, because she's the one that's kind of putting her toe in the water of contemporary art. I know. You wanna wait? I'm almost done.
We're so close to done, Dita.
So she was really excited about. We have this just blooming digital art component. I think it's like a new major that finally got approved. They wouldn't let them do BFAs, but they let them do BAs in DA. In digital art. So we have all the digital art people, and we have all these amazing new spaces, and they doubled the size of the library, but the second half of the library has no books. It's all just study spaces and giant interactive screens, and it's very flashy, and it makes me deeply uncomfortable, but I'm like simultaneously super into it.
Yeah.
And they were like, this is something we could show in the Val. The visualization as, I forget what it stands for. But
Something
it's this
great.
giant, like, it's a screen that's the size of that wall.
Oh, wow.
It's like the visualization something lab.
Yeah, right. It's always a lab lately. It's always something lab.
So we'll try and show it in that giant screen, and
that's exciting.
and then shoot video of us showing video. It just
Which
gets
is the
so
simulacra
meta.
of the simulacra of the simulacra.
And exactly, and it'll be like the opposite of reality.
Right.
And eventually we'll all get uploaded to it, and it'll like just feel normal for things to balloon out.
Yeah.
And if we like download back into our bodies, we'll be like, oh, life is so flat.
Right. Why is it like this? Nothing even balloons out, right? And then we're all living in the science fiction now.
And we're all in the, I don't know.
Yeah, I know. It's been a
I
lot.
have been awake.
You've been
for
awake.
A very
So
long
yeah,
time.
you've been awake.
This is normal.
Dita's been hanging. It's been hanging really tight through everything, which I love.
Crowd. I hope that there's a camera that can like pan back out like they do at the like in the Daily Show.
Have your Jolly Show crowd moment.
Yeah.
I know, and I'm excited that folks were able to come out and hear us chat. And like I said, so in January we'll have this archived on the gallery website, which is really exciting. And we'll be here a little bit longer to talk some more about the artwork. I do want to, I know I don't want to push you too hard because I know it's been such a long day.
I can do this all
night. But if there's any questions, I do want to just give that opportunity. If anyone has any questions about anything maybe you hoped we had touched on that we didn't have a chance to touch on. And it could be in terms of, there's a lot of different types of art that we didn't talk about here. We didn't even get to talk about
the astronomy.
We didn't talk about the astronomy map. We didn't really talk so much about collage. We have these two-sided flags, you call them, that are hanging. I know we can only see one side from here. But I do want to just give an opportunity if there's any questions. Yeah. Well, maybe we can go here and then here. Yeah.
So I was kind of just wondering how you got into maps and just like projecting things onto canvas in the first place. Like, where did that interest start?
So it started with the self-portrait, because not with that self-portrait specifically, but my task in grad school was to do a self-portrait. That it was like some capstone for something.
Sure.
And there's just so much of that happening at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts. It's just such a deeply figurative program that I burnt out. I didn't want to paint people, and I kept trying to do these like history paintings, and I was really into like I was looking at a lot of comparative mythology, and I was trying to like put myself and other people in these kind of reimagined mythological realms, right? And try to create these universes by doing that. And I always kept falling short. Like, I was so disappointed. Even like when I did a good job with the bodies, with my body, there's still so many amazing portrait painters and figurative painters in that program. I was like, I don't even compete, But then I realized that I wanted the viewer to be the body, right? So I wanted to make you the figure. I wanted to make me the figure, but I didn't want to be like a repoussoir figure in the painting. I just wanted to have no people in the painting and just be the real life figures, be the figures, right? And so I started thinking about like my family and my family tree, because that had been like the idea of the self-portrait. I was trying to go this Frida family tree route, and I landed on this image by Joaquin Torres Garcia, and I was like, well, he just did South America, but my family's from all over the world. I'm going to do the whole world with the South at the top. And that's how that began, and the Academy ended up buying that piece, because I squirted it with water so it would drip, with wet paint so it would drip, so it would show that the South was intended to be at the top. And you'll see those drips there too.
Yeah.
And then simultaneously, when I like had that moment of like, okay, I want these portraits to be like of a moment that you're in, my favorite thing was to do stargazing. And I grew up stargazing in Uruguay and in Oklahoma, but I had recently moved to Philadelphia and there was no stargazing. So I like had this nostalgia. And so as soon as like the world map started, the star map started as like a way to like, okay, I'm gonna get out to like Lancaster, to like the country, and like get some stars, and then I'm gonna paint them. And I was like, I'm just gonna do this for my grad school thing, but then I couldn't stop. And it all just kept going, and it still is.
Yeah, the discipline of being the artist, right? You're not just making art. You're just this is your practice.
And then with the astronomy, those are maps. People,
Right.
I mean, they're maps of just ginormous amounts of space, of light years, which it's such a wonderful way to measure distance. Okay, it's a time,
right?
and photons, but it's distant. They're just maps, and they're rendered in false color. And if you were in a spaceship, they wouldn't look like that.
Which breaks my heart always. I get so frustrated that we wouldn't be able to see those bands of spectrum.
By the time the windows will have the false color rendering on, it'll be fine.
There you go. We'll be all right as we go to Mars.
Yeah.
I know there was another question. Is that?
I was just going to ask. Sorry about that. No. Sorry, I was just going to ask, as an artist, do you follow any rules or any non-rules for yourself, or what do you teach your students?
Yes. So I was working on my teaching philosophy the other day because I have to, hand it to someone, and I was thinking about, how I believe in a culture of kindness, and I'm teaching mindfulness and acceptance. But you have to know best practices so you can break rules properly. You can't break rules that aren't rules to begin with, right? So I really like the idea of knowing how you are supposed to use a medium and knowing how you are intended to view an image, to consume a graphic, whatever, so you can disrupt it, right? The culture disruption, whatever. Just, you can't break rules you don't know exist. And it's great if that happens by accident, but it kind of loses some of this. If you know that you're pushing boundaries and breaking rules, I don't know, I think it makes it a little sweeter. So I guess I would say, become the master of whatever you are seeking to conquer so you can let it free, My pleasure. Great questions.
Are there if there's any other questions, we'll give them. Yeah?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Muchas gracias por estar con nosotros y quería darle las gracias por compartir con la comunidad. Thank you so much for being with us, and I just wanted to thank you for the piece. I've always loved Joaquin Torres Garcia's drawing, and that's the culmination of the melody, so I just wanted to thank you for that, so it's beautiful. Muchas gracias.
No, es un placer. Qué bonito poder escuchar el español.
Pues gracias a usted.
Dita, do you have any questions for me? Yeah, ask me a question. Ask me anything.
If you just don't have the stuff that you need for teaching your class, then do you just go and buy the stuff?
As you know, I'm a big fan of just finding stuff to use, finding leaves and using them, and using paper bags from the grocery store. And today I learned how to do sculpture with aluminum foil. It turns out you can do aluminum foil sculpture and coat it with that clay that Abu got us, and they look amazing. But yeah, we go and buy it sometimes. My favorite is when the art department is we have a budget, and I'm yes, let's use that budget. We can talk about what budget means later.
Yeah, that's a good conversation. That's a good question. That's
Yes.
a good question.
Me voy a copiar y voy a hablar español también, porque siento que es muy importante decir esto en español. Es muy chévere ver a alguien que se parece a ti, más en este lugar que es tan desconocido. Entonces quería saber cómo te conectas tú en un lugar pues, que no es muy parecido a tu comunidad y a tu cultura, y cómo te conectas hoy con la cultura uruguaya.
Con la cultura uruguaya, ok. Sí, me encanta el español. Entonces, pero claro, es difícil tener estas conversaciones cuando una gran parte de los que están aquí no la entienden, ¿no? We're talking about how it's so important to use this language, the Spanish language, but it's also difficult to do so when you're leaving people out, right? Porque English has become this lingua franca that I don't think we necessarily anticipated. And how do I connect to Uruguayan culture, a la cultura uruguaya? Claro, porque eso también me hace nepantlera. No me quería mudar del Uruguay, pero ahora cuando vuelvo al Uruguay tampoco soy uruguaya. Y aunque tengo una abuelita que la quiero mucho y mi hija se llama Sira como mi abuela Sira y Sonia como mi abuela Sonia, que es israelí, que espero que esté mirándonos, las voy a visitar, pero soy extranjera en mi propio país. I am a visitor in my own country, right? I stopped. As much as I have dual citizenship, I am still, like, North Carolina just passed some legislation that said that you have to be a born citizen to vote in some things, like naturalized citizens can't, which it's not going to hold, but like they're trying,
what that
right?
means.
And in Uruguay, like, once you're a Uruguayan citizen, you're not allowed to give up your citizenship. So even if you're like, I renounce my citizenship, they're like, nah.
Sorry,
you
no,
belong to us
turns out.
forever. Así que siempre me van a dar mi pasaporte uruguayo, aunque no lo quiera. Pero es complicado, ¿verdad? It's complicated because you're not from either place. And that is something that Gloria Anzaldúa talks about. It's
Absolutely.
like, you're neither here nor there, but you're in both places. And it gives you the perspective for both places.
Yeah.
Like, en Uruguay todo el mundo está muy bajoneado. Everybody is very depressed in Uruguay. But if you look at Uruguay from the United States perspective, education is free through college. Healthcare is free.
Wow.
Like, it is 90% renewable powered. All the electricity is like renewable powered. It's an extremely progressive country. But they're like, Uruguay es el peor. Es el mejor país, es el peor país. You know? And then they look at the United States, y todo el mundo quiere venir y ser gringo, no? Everybody wants to move here. We've got, you know, an entire election that was predicated on this idea of, you know, we want less immigrants. But then you get here, and it's like, oh, well, you know, we have a lot of stuff. That's nice. You know, and everybody has a car. Puedo manejar mucho mejor que los uruguayos. But, so you get this double vision that Anzaldúa keeps talking about, right? And I don't think I have a good answer for your question. Porque no lo sé. Quiero hablar en español, pero mira toda la gente que no nos entiende. Y quiero hablar en inglés, pero hay ciertas cosas que no suenan tan bonitas en inglés como en español, ¿verdad? Pero siempre agradezco a la gente que me dice que les gusta el espejo, ¿no? Poderse ver en mí, en una persona que no es el Mark Zuckerberg, ¿no? To like have somebody up here that's like not a Mark Zuckerberg or a Jeff Bezos, like this like archetype of like the, or fine, how about like a Jeff Koons, like, you know, have someone that is someone like me, that's like a not anything.
Right, just you, not this, not that, just you. And I think one thing that I've come to understand, and in part through so soon, I know, Tita. The students over here are like, seriously though, when? We've got work to do. So soon. But I do think this is so important because one thing that I've learned having so many wonderful conversations, and your work brought those conversations to our school, so thank you for that.
It's my pleasure.
Is that we are all in different ways in that in-between place. So even if you were born in this country, maybe you've never even left this country, we all have these pluralities. Everyone has these pluralities. And I think, you know, I loved you were talking about that idea that, like, you know, who is from, you know, who's not an immigrant? I think that's something that we actually all have in common. We all have in common that there's places where we feel like we're in an in-between place. We feel the tension of being this and being that. Whether it's related to our families or our ethnicity or our race or our gender or sexuality, or whether or not we, you know, like certain foods, or whether or not, you know, whatever with certain sports, whatever identities they are, we share that. We all share that. You know,
We're all Nepantleros.
We're all Nepantleros. And even yeah, even the tension of sitting here and knowing some of what you were just talking about, understanding almost enough to get myself in trouble, but understanding also so little that I was pissed off at myself for not paying better attention to my family in Mexico City when they were talking, you know, and keeping up with my Spanish. That's a tension. That's a multiplicity, you know? So often, you know, it's so easy. I always say, like, I'm amazed by folks who can go to another country and live there where they don't know the language, because it's so disorienting, yeah? It's so confusing. And so I want to thank I want to thank our amazing William Ryan, who is leaving us soon, so I'm sorry to call you out, but it has to be done, for bringing Spanish into the conversation. Yeah, and I'd like to thank you as well for keeping it there, and you as well for keeping it there, because it's just, it's one more way that we can think about. Yeah.
I used to listen to so much music in English, and it was like, you know, I could like sing along and I had no idea what was going on. And then you learn the lyrics and you're like, it's kind of boring. But like that's again, it's like that is Nepantla. Like it gives you this viewpoint that you're like, oh, it's not as fun when you understand it.
Right. They're beautiful sounds. There's Do you know what you're singing? No. But I love the sound of it. So I know, Dita, we should go home. Yeah? We should go home. So,
spaghetti and meatballs for everyone.
Yes, and you get spaghetti and meatballs, and you get spaghetti and meatballs. So, you know, we'll get to bring you back again next week via Zoom. There's been so many different connections that we've been able to make because you've been with us.
Design,
and so I'm going to have to call out Trent Welcome, who's here, with Dina, who's also gone through interior design and architecture. And you know, we were able to connect you to our interior design studios. We've been able, so many of our architecture students, our art students, like I said before, have been engaged. So there's so much interdisciplinarity that's come as a result of having you here. I'm so grateful that you took a risk to come here to us in the middle of where are you, New York City? No, not New York City, but close to New York City. And just, you know, take the check, be with us, share your work with us, share your practice with us. Dita, thank you too for coming. We're so glad to have you with us. And we'll have to just, you know, we'll stay connected. We'll keep the connections, not just here together, but also between UNCW and Brookdale.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah.
It's been such a gift. And it was a big risk, and I'm glad we got to do this. I'm glad you and I ran into each other at that conference, and we were united by temple.
Yes,
you know.
Yes, that's true.
So it's something so great about academia is that we turn this into culture. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Absolutely. I love that. Thank you,
really
Anna.
Great. Thank you,
and thank you all for joining us tonight. It's been wonderful to have you with us. Thank you, guys. All right. So we're going to de-mic. We do have, we're going to de-mic and be here for a minute, but we do have